Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company and welcome back to my kitchen, where today we're going to be preparing some Thymol solution to put into some sugar syrup. And the reason we use it is to stop our sugar syrup from going mouldy, and if we can prevent the syrup from going mouldy, then obviously we can keep it safe in storage without it deteriorating or going bad. And when we do feed it to the bees, it's not going to sit in the feeder and go mouldy, or once it's stored by the bees, it's then not going to go mouldy there either. There is some evidence to suggest that maybe thymolized or thymolated syrup can be effective against nosema. Although there's no definitive evidence, there have been some attempts to research the effects of thymolized syrup and thymol on nosema. But of course it has to be an authorised product if you're going to use any products on your bees, certainly here in the UK, and thymolized syrup is not an authorised product for the treatment of nosema. It is, however, okay to use thymolized syrup and using thymol in syrup to prevent it from going mouldy. So it could be that simply by having some thymol in the sugar syrup, you can actually give the bees a little bit of an added boost by helping with any nosema problems that they might have. But as I say, there doesn't appear to be any definitive evidence to suggest that that's the case. So some years ago I produced some thymol solution, which was simply thymol crystals that have been dissolved into methylated spirits, and used that in the sugar syrup to treat the sugar syrup. But because of the way the thymol interacts with the sugar syrup, sometimes I found that the thymol vapour would rise to the area above the syrup, and as a result bees were suffocating when they would go into the feeder to feed on the syrup, and so all I was doing was killing bees. If you search online, you'll find that there are several different recipes, lots of different ideas about how to use thymol in sugar syrup. Notably, there's a couple of very good sites. One is the Dave Cushman website, which is now operated by Roger Patterson here in the UK, and also I'm sure most of you are aware of Randy Oliver's website, which is Scientific Beekeeping, and I'll put links to both of those websites in the description below. But both offer up suggestions as to how you can produce thymolized syrup or thymolated syrup in order to treat your bees. It appears that it's been used for many years, and that beekeepers have used it to prevent the sugar syrup from going mouldy since probably the 1940s, from what I can gather from what I've read. I thought it would be really useful to show you how we're going to make up our next batch of thymol solution ready to use in our sugar syrup. And this method uses lecithin granules to act as an emulsifier within the mix, and so the thymol doesn't then separate out from either the sugar syrup or any of the water that's added to create the mix. That hopefully will then hold the thymol in solution within the syrup, and we won't then get that issue of bees suffocating. I have to say that the amounts that you put into the sugar syrup are really small, so don't be tempted to just add an extra half a teaspoon, because that could be the difference between giving them a good treatment and overdosing the bees and finding that again you're killing bees. So do stick with any measurements that you see online, or in fact if you follow the method that we're using here, stick to the amounts that we're using and you shouldn't go too far wrong. So let's have a look at what we've got all prepared, ready to mix up this solution. So the key ingredients here are the thymol crystals. These can be bought from most beekeeping suppliers. You tend to get quite large packs, so if perhaps there are several members of a beekeeping group that are interested in doing this, I would maybe share out the thymol crystals. Isopropyl alcohol or isopropanol. Now, I buy this for use when I'm doing my microscopy work. Again, you're not going to need a great deal. 5 mils of isopropanol is all you're going to need. So again, if you're doing some microscopy work, then you probably have something like this in stock. If not, again, ask around at your beekeeping group. All of these products can be purchased online, so they're very easy to obtain. And the lecithin granules, these actually are supposed to lower cholesterol. So if you've got high cholesterol, maybe this is a good product to try. But again, I've got 500 grams here, and you only need a teaspoon. So it might be worth discussing with the bee group or buying a small quantity if you're not going to use them on a regular basis. And then we've got a measured quantity of the thymol crystals here. This is 30 grams, and so we've already decanted 30 grams of crystals into a honey jar. You can use any jar, that would be fine, but we're going to put this into a water bath to help dissolve these crystals in the isopropanol alcohol. You only need 5 mils of isopropanol alcohol, and I'll put a list of all the ingredients in the video as well, so that you've got a copy of the mix. And this is a mix that I've taken from the Dave Cushman website. So we're going to add just 5 mils of the isopropanol to these crystals. It looks, I can't see how on earth it's going to dissolve them, but we'll give it a go and see what happens. And then we're going to put it into the water bath, and we're going to dissolve all of the crystals in the isopropanol. So the first step is to add our 5 mils of alcohol, isopropanol, into the thymol crystals. Just give that a bit of a swirl around. It's amazing how it's dissolving away. It's a bit like when you add water to icing sugar, it just dissolves very, very quickly. So we're now going to pop this into a hot water bath to dissolve the crystals more fully into the alcohol. So as you can see, we've got the crystals in the alcohol, and it is, as described, starting to dissolve the crystals into the alcohol. So we'll just continue this in the hot water until all of the crystals have dissolved. So as you can see, just 5 mils of isopropanol alcohol and the thymol crystals are fully dissolved into the alcohol. So the next stage is to mix up some of the lecithin granules into some water so that we can then mix the two together and emulsify the whole mix. So what we've now got is 140 mils of hot water that we've put into our hot water bath, and we're now going to add just 1 teaspoon of the lecithin granules into our jam jar and mix it until they're dissolved. So the instructions call for 1 teaspoon, so I've got our measuring teaspoon, and looking in our kitchen drawer, our teaspoons are all sorts of different sizes. So I'm going to measure out 1 teaspoon and just weigh it out so that you can see exactly how much it weighs. So there's our teaspoon. And it's approximately 5 grams, so it's 4.97 grams, so let's say 5 grams of lecithin granules. So we'll just add our teaspoon of granules to our jam jar and then stir this to mix them in. And this is going to take a while just to dissolve these granules into the water. So you might be wondering why we can't just add the thymol crystals to the water and dissolve them in the water. Let's just see what happens when we add thymol crystals to water and try to mix them up. They just don't dissolve into the water. It just clumps together and it won't dissolve in the water. So that's the reason that we mix it up in the alcohol first and make this solution, because if you just added the thymol crystals to a sugar syrup, this is the result that you'll get. So we now have our lecithin granules dissolved in 140 ml of water, and this is our thymol in isopropanol alcohol. So the next stage is to simply add this to our lecithin mix and then stir it so that the two become well mixed and emulsified. So on the Dave Cushman website, Roger says that you can strain the lecithin solution. You can possibly see that there are still some granules, some small granules in the mix that haven't yet dissolved fully away. We've had this in the water bath for about 10 minutes and this is about as good as it's going to get. Again, on the website, Roger Patterson does say that he doesn't bother to strain it, but if you wanted to, you could strain out those small particles. So all that remains is for us to pour in the thymol and stir, and you can see actually that it's gone a milky colour. It's lightened up quite a lot, and so now we have the emulsification has taken place, and now that's nicely mixed, and you can see that there are a few granules floating around in there. So this is it. This is our thymol stock solution, and this is what we're going to use to add to our sugar syrup, our heavy sugar syrup, to prevent it from going mouldy when it's in the feeders and when it's actually in the hives. So a couple of things to note: that this is what Roger Patterson describes on the Dave Cushman website as a manly solution, so manly strength solution, and you need to add this at a rate of 1 teaspoon to 13.5 litres of syrup. And if you're making your own syrup, then that's 4 kilos of sugar to 2.5 litres of water. So you can see just 1 teaspoon of this solution in that amount of syrup is all that you require, and it's very easy to overdose. It's very easy to put too much of this into the syrup. I've made that mistake myself, and it's important to emphasize that you really don't need to add more. It won't look like much, you'll barely be able to smell it, but you will be able to smell it in the syrup. But any stronger solutions, and you run the risk of either doing damage to the bees or killing bees. So stick with that measurement and you shouldn't go too far wrong. And this solution will keep now, I would say probably indefinitely, but it'll certainly last for quite a while, and you can see the quantity that we've just made. So what I would suggest is that if you've got friends, beekeeping friends at the local bee group, that maybe you make up some stock solution together and that you share it out and use it to keep your sugar syrup from going mouldy over this autumn and winter. So I hope you found that interesting. There's lots of information about making thymolized or thymolated syrups out there on the internet. I hope that by showing you how we've mixed it up, it will give you a guide as to the quantities that you need, and hopefully you can make up some of this syrup with a minimum of fuss and maybe share it with your friends at the bee club. I'll put links in the description below to the websites that I've been to check out these recipes, and again I'll post the recipe that we've used in the description below the video so that you can have a look at it here as well. And finally, just to let you know that I'm now producing a weekly beekeeping podcast called Beekeeping Short and Sweet, and that's available on most of the podcast players, but particularly you can access it via iTunes. It comes out on a weekly basis, and if you want to get early access to the podcast, then take a look at my Patreon page, and again I'll leave all of the details down in the description below. I hope you found that interesting, and we'll catch up next time. Thanks for watching.